In this video, I'll be sharing 10 tips that I learned that helped me improve my drawing faster so that hopefully you could implement these same tips. Tip number 1, do quick sketches instead of long drawings. Do a lot of quick sketches of what you want to draw instead of one drawing that takes a long time. The reason for this is because every time you draw, you will get feedback on what you are trying to draw, and you may realize that the proportions are wrong or that you drew something at the wrong angle. With every iteration, there will probably be something wrong that you notice, and every time you do a new sketch, you can try and fix these problems until eventually you are happy with the results. Tip number 2, use a pen. This is probably the most helpful tip that I've ever learned because I used to spend a lot of time erasing every time I made a mistake drawing, which hindered my progress because of all the time I spent erasing when I could have just moved on. There is another benefit to using a pen, which goes into tip number 3, compare your drawings. If you compare your drawings, you will see what you've been doing right as well as what you have been doing wrong. You will also be able to see your improvement. Sometimes you may draw something worse than you previously drew, but when that happens, just compare it to the drawing you thought was better to see what you did differently. Also compare it to what you were actually trying to draw. Tip number 4, draw from memory. If you want to get better at drawing things without looking at references, you will have to practice drawing from memory. I have never been good at drawing from memory myself, but that's probably because I never drew anything without looking at a reference. However, I've been trying to draw from memory more often. Drawing from memory forces you to think about the shape of objects and how things move. Once you figure out how to draw something from memory, it will be a lot easier to draw in different positions. Whereas if you did it by looking at a reference, you probably wouldn't remember how to draw it or understand the general shapes or how the object moves. Tip number 5, draw from real life. Another way to get better at drawing is to draw from real life. This will force you to think about how to represent 3D objects on paper, and it will also force you to think about perspective while you are drawing. Tip number 6, study the fundamentals. I have tried to learn a lot of skills, and there is usually a set of fundamentals you have to know to get good at a skill. Drawing is no different. To get good, you will have to study the fundamentals at some point. I wouldn't recommend spending all your time drawing to learn the fundamentals because it's boring and you will probably burn out. I know that because I did that. Instead, try to set some time aside to study and just draw what you want to draw. Tip number 7, break things down into shapes you understand. You may have heard the best way to draw something is by breaking it down into shapes. If you follow along with a tutorial, you may get frustrated because you don't understand the shapes the same way the artist you're watching does. So I think it is better to break down what you're trying to draw in shapes you understand. Tip number 8, set milestones. To get better at drawing, you have to practice regularly. A good way to do that is to set milestones. It could be something like fill out a page in your sketchbook every day or something like draw for 10 minutes every day. Tip number 8, set milestones. To get better at drawing, you have to practice regularly. A good way to do that is to set milestones. It could be something like fill out a page in your sketchbook every day or something like draw for 10 minutes a day. I personally like filling out a page every day because it's a goal I can accomplish, whereas drawing for a set amount of time doesn't feel like I accomplished a goal, but if setting a time works better for you, then do that. Tip number 9, look at other artists' work. When you look at other artists' work, try to understand how they drew what they drew and try to implement that in your own drawings. It can also give you inspiration for what you want to draw. And another thing, don't be discouraged by looking at people's art if they're really good. Looking at people's art can feel discouraging because you see how good they are and you know you are nowhere near their level, but you've only seen the finished product and not how much time they spent learning. Tip number 10, experiment. Try experimenting with different drawing techniques and Tip number 10, experiment. Try experimenting with different drawing techniques. Try to draw using only what you've learned so far without looking at anything. If you figure out how to draw something well while experimenting, you will probably have a better understanding of how to draw that object.